This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Baby Criticare 2020. We have discussed about the most of the topics related to cardiovascular system. Today we have a discussion on management of ST elevation myocardial infarction and non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. So we have our cardiologist Dr. Rajit KS. Sir is associate professor in cardiology, Sri Jayadeva Institute of Cardiovascular Science Research, Mysore. Sir will enlighten all of us with the how to manage when the patient comes with this tenure and study. So over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all for this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank ISCCM Mysore and Impact and Mahan Mysore for giving me this opportunity. Today, I will be discussing about management of ST elevation MI and non-ST elevation MI. As all of you know, this myocardial infarction is very common nowadays. Earlier, it was thought to be a disease of older age, but nowadays it's affecting third and fourth decade of a person's life. So this is the cardiovascular illness is the leading cause of death worldwide, and its clinical presentation may vary from silent ischemia in diabetic and elderly to stable angina, unstable angina, non-ST elevation MI, ST elevation MI, and it may lead to heart failure and sometimes sudden cardiac death. What is pathophysiology? It is the main, this one is demand and supply mismatch, because there will be a demand for more blood, whereas the blood is not reaching the myocardium. That will lead to this acute coronary syndrome. There is various degrees of coronary artery occlusion to myocardial oxygen supply demand mismatch. This is mainly due to rupture or erosion of atherosclerotic plaques, which leads to complex process of inflammation, platelet activation, aggregation, thrombus formation, and microembolization of these thrombi to distal vasculature. This is a pictorial cross section of a coronary artery, which shows various grades of atherosclerosis. You can see in part 1 where there is no atherosclerosis or normal coronary artery, whereas as age progresses, they say more after 2 years only this plaque starts building up. So in the second cross section, early atherosclerosis or early formation of plaques. This gradually progresses to formation of vulnerable plaque or thin fibroatheroma cap with the plaque. So due to shear stress or strain or emotional stress, all these things will lead to sudden increase in turbulence of blood, increase in blood pressure. All these things leads to rupture of this plaque. Once this plaque rupture, you can see here in cross section, these cheesy material or cholesterol, what we call cholesterol deposition, these things will be exposed to the blood. So that will lead to activation of coagulation cascade. Initially, platelets will aggregate here. So antiplatelets acts on that aspect to reduce the platelet aggregation. Then once platelet adhesion, aggregation occurs, then fibrin formation, thrombin formation, fibrin formation, and which leads to various degree of this occlusion of this coronary artery. If it gets 100% occluded, which leads to ST elevation MI. If it is partial occlusion, 90%, 95%, then patient may present with non-ST elevation MI or sometimes unstable angina. So once this process occurs, then there will be activation of inner thrombolytic system. This will clear this artery, or due to medical thrombolysis, or due to stenting. This plaque will exclude the plaque and will stent this part, and this will once healing of that plaque occurs, this is what it appears like. I will be discussing a case, a 64-year-old man with diabetes and hypertension. He wakes up with severe chest pressure. He was taken for emergency department after 1 hour when pain failed to resolve. Initially, maybe as usual, everybody thinks that it is gastritis, take gastric tablet, all those things, antacids. If it doesn't subside, then only they will go to doctor. So is this patient at risk of ACS? Yes, because as all of you know, there is different risk factors, modifiable and non-modifiable coronary artery atherosclerotic risk factors are there. What this man has, he is 64-year-old, age is there. Then male gender is more prone for atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease, and diabetes and hypertension. So almost 4 risk factors are there. Does this symptoms suggest acute coronary syndrome? Because many problem presents as chest pain like musculoskeletal pain or costochondritis, cervical spondylosis. All these things also can present as chest pain. So whether its symptoms are suggestive of ACS. And what other information is needed to determine the type of ACS? Which type of ACS? ACS mainly it is divided into unstable angina, ST elevation, non-ST elevation MI, and ST elevation MI. Which type of ACS is this? Whether it is unstable angina, NSTEMI, or STEMI. So for this, we need to evaluate him further. So as I told you earlier, non-modifiable risk factors are male, gender, age, and family history. Whereas modify these things we cannot modify by birth. These things comes and we cannot change this. And modifiable risk factors are diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, smoking, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, other vascular disease, and drug abuse and diet. These are the main modifiable risk factors. So how these acute coronary syndrome patients present? They usually present with typical retrosternal burning, heaviness or tightness. It will be diffuse pain, not localized, pinpointing type of pain. If it is pinpoint type or localizing pain, it is unlikely to be acute coronary syndrome. Here, the chest pressure or heaviness, it usually lasts more than 1 hour if it is ACS. If it is stable angina, it should last at least 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes many patients come with they tell pricking type of pain for few seconds. That 99% it will not be cardiac. If it is cardiac, then it will persist at least for 5 to 10 minutes. And if it is ACS, at least it will persist for more than 1 hour or till treatment he receives. This, as we discussed earlier, this patient had early morning occurrence. These ACS are common in the early morning due to hormonal and catecholamines. And location and radiation is very important. The ACS are coronary artery disease pain usually radiates to upper limb, neck, jaw, and also associated with other symptoms like breathlessness, sweating, nausea, vomiting, lightheadedness, or giddiness. And these symptoms usually will be exacerbated by exertion and it's relieved by rest or night rest. So characteristic of typical angina is it should meet at least 3 criteria. The retrosternal heaviness or tightness which comes on exertion, or emotional stress which relieved with rest or night rest. These 3 criteria should be there for angina, typical angina. So same thing shown in picture here. This is in the pinpoint localized pain, low likelihood. As the diffuse and the pain increases, it is in various degrees of acute coronary syndrome like unstable angina and non-STEMI, NSTEMI and STEMI. And this is ECG, ST depression in unstable angina and non-ST elevation MI and ST elevation in ST elevation MI, and associated with the elevation of troponin will be the characteristic of this ACS diagnosis. So patient gets admitted with chest pain, working diagnosis of acute coronary syndrome was made. Then we have to take ECG. If it is persistent ST elevation is there, then it is ST elevation MI. And in ECG, STT changes are there, or normal or undetermined ECG is there. And we should do, if the symptoms are typical, we should do troponin. If cardiac troponin is normal, it is unstable angina, then we can do non-invasive testing. If it is troponin rise and fall is there, then non-ST elevation MI, then we have to take him for intervention. These are the different conditions other than acute coronary syndrome where we can see rise in troponins. As in ACS, this is mainly related to myocardial ischemia, mainly due to plaque rupture or intraluminar coronary artery thrombus formation, which will lead to supply-demand mismatch and ACS rise in troponins. Whereas this may also occur in supply-demand imbalance, not due to ACS, or it may be mainly due to tachyarrhythmias, where there is increase in heart rate that will lead to stress on myocardium, and there will be increase in troponin release. Or bradyarrhythmia, where there will be cardiac output will be less, and they will have stress supply-demand mismatch, and troponin may get elevated. Then aortic dissection or severe aortic valve disease, where there will be severe concentric LVH. So again, supply-demand mismatch will occur. Then hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Then in cardiogenic hypovolemic or septic shock, in severe respiratory failure and severe anemia, hypertension with or without LVH. Then coronary spasm like Prinzmetal angina. Then coronary embolism or vasculitis, and coronary endothelial dysfunction without significant coronary artery disease can also occur due to microvascular ischemia and endothelial dysfunction. Then sometimes it can occur, which is due to injury and not related to myocardial ischemia, like cardiac contusions, surgery, ablations, and pacing or defibrillator shock. Then also in rhabdomyolysis with the cardiac involvement and myocarditis, and the cardiotoxin agents like anthracyclines and herceptins. And multifactorial or indeterminate myocardial injury, mainly in heart failure. It is a poor prognostic indicator in heart failure. If troponin elevation is there in heart failure, that indicates poor prognosis. And stress or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, and severe pulmonary embolism or pulmonary hypertension, then sepsis and critically ill patients, renal failure, severe acute neurological disease like stroke and subarachnoid hemorrhage, then infiltrative disorders like amyloidosis, sarcoidosis, then strenuous exercise. So in ICU, many times we see elevation in troponin with normal, no history of suggestive of ACS and normal ECG. These are the different conditions which may lead to elevation in troponins. Then myocardial infarction, universal definition or classification they have made based on different pathophysiology. Type 1 spontaneous myocardial infarction is what we usually see due to atherosclerotic plaque rupture or ulceration. Then type 2 is myocardial infarction secondary to ischemia imbalance, like typically in anemia or tachyarrhythmia, bradyarrhythmia, all those things. Then myocardial infarction type 3 is MI resulting in death when biomarker values are unavailable. The symptoms and signs may be characteristic of our presentation, may be like acute coronary syndrome, where patient suddenly comes and collapses, where we have not done cardiac troponin. This is type 3, it falls into type 3 classification. Type 4, again, it is divided into A and B. This is MI related to percutaneous coronary intervention like angioplasty, and MI related to stent thrombosis. And type 5 is MI related to coronary artery bypass surgery. The same case which we discussed earlier, his chest pain, he was initially treated with NTG, nitroglycerin, aspirin, clopidogrel, and enoxaparin. His chest pain worsens after initial relief, and his ECG was repeated, which showed the characteristic extensive antral MI. ST elevation can be seen in V2, V3, V4, V5, V6, and there is reciprocal changes of ST depression in lead 3. And also 1 and AVL ST elevations are there. So what is the diagnosis? This is ST elevation MI. What are the next steps? How to treat this ST elevation MI? What are the main treatment modality? That is mainly primary percutaneous coronary intervention. The basic idea is to open the closed vessel. So once we open the vessel, then his pain relieves, his magnitude of damage will come down. So earlier we open the vessel, it will be better. So I'll be discussing this European Society of Cardiology guidelines, which has come recently, and they have divided, as I told you earlier, class 1 is recommended or indicated, either tests or intervention or treatment should be given to all the patients. Class 2, again, they have divided into class 2A and class 2B. In class 2A, the benefit outweighs the risk. So we should give the treatment for the patient. And class 2B, this is controversial. In some selected patients, it may be beneficial, whereas some it may be harmful. So we should decide depending on each patient. Class 3 recommendation is harmful. It should not be done. So for initial diagnosis, ECG should be done once we suspect ACS. ECG should be done within 10 minutes. That target delay for according to different ACCH, American Society and European Society, within 10 minutes we should do ECG and we should come to a conclusion. What is the diagnosis? And all these persons who does ECG, like first medical contact person, either in ambulance or it is in a small nursing home, they should have defibrillator, because all these ACS patients prone to death. Their early during the early period, the death is mainly due to VT and VF. So all should have defibrillator. Then in some suspected cases, we should do additional leads like posterior leads and RV leads. In patients, if they have ST depression in V1, V2, V3 and typical ACS symptoms, then that is suggestive of posterior wall MI. In such patient, we should do V7, V8, V9, that is posterior leads in posterior axillary line and scapular line and paraspinal line. In that area, we should place the V7, V8, V8, V9 in fifth intercostal space. And V3R and V4R same as left. We have to place right side V3 and V4. We should take lead for diagnosing RV infarction. And all patients we should take blood sample for serum markers, troponin. So how to diagnose in other like left ventral punch block? New onset LBBB itself is suggestive of ACS. Whereas if already patient has LBBB, then if patient develop ST elevation MI, this is the criteria. Like if positive in the precordial lead, positive QRS complexes, if ST segment elevation is more than or equal to 1 millimeter, then that is suggestive of ST elevation. That is concordant, means if positive QRS, then ST elevation should be there. And ST depression in V1, V2, V3. That is in LBBB, most of the times V1, V2, V3 will have negative complexes. So that is concordant, that is ST depression. If ST depression in V1, V2, V3 in LBBB pattern, also suggestive of STEMI. And discordant ST segment, if in negative complexes are there, V1, V2, V3, discordant opposite direction, that is ST elevation more than 5 millimeter, is suggestive of STEMI in LBBB patient. And earlier RBBB was considered not significant, whereas the recent guidelines, they almost give equal importance as LBBB. New onset RBBB is also suggestive of STEMI. Then in the ventricular pace, these days many patients we see on pacemaker. Usually pacemaker lead will be placed in RB, so they will have LBBB pattern. Almost similar things we can take for STEMI. Still they are less specific in paced patients. Then as I told you earlier, isolated ST depression more than 0.5 mm in V1 to V3, we should do posterior lead. If ST elevation is there more than 0.5 mm in this posterior lead, then that is posterior wall MI. And usually this left main coronary artery occlusion, sometimes they present with global ST depression and ST elevation in AVR and V1. This either sometimes this is also seen in myocarditis and also in left main occlusion or severe triple other disease. This is one thing we should be very careful. Then initial treatment, we should correct hypoxemia. If saturation is less than 90%, we should give oxygen. If more than 90%, we should not give oxygen. It is harmful according to this guidelines. It may generate free radicals and it may be harmful. And analgesic like opioids and benzodiazepines can be given to relieve anxiety and pain. And in all cardiac arrest patient, if we suspect ACS and the ECG is suggestive of STEMI, immediately he should be taken for primary angioplasty. Or if he is outside, immediately we should transfer that patient to a primary PCI capable center. And targeted temperature management should be done in all such patients. This is a treatment algorithm. Once we diagnose, we should monitor ECG, admit in ICU, give oxygen if needed, then serial cardiac markers. Then immediately we should start him on antiplatelet agents, anticoagulant agents, and anti-ischemic or analgesic agents. And, and what is the difference between NSTEMI and STEMI? STEMI, according to guidelines, we should open the vessel as early as possible. That is the main difference. Goal of the STEMI treatment is mainly to restore blood flow to infarct-related artery, that is reperfusion of the closed artery. This is mainly to limit infarct size. Earlier we open the vessel, better will be the outcome, and limited will be the infarct size. What are the options available? Mainly primary angioplasty, and next second option is thrombolysis. If patient is not amenable for angioplasty, then coronary artery bypass grafting can be tried in such patient, though it has a very high mortality in acute setting. This graph mainly depicts this earlier the better, time is muscle. That is the concept. The concept came based on this graph, which was published in 2005, where first 3 hours are very crucial. If you treat the patient or if you open the vessel in first 3 hours, the outcome is very good, and the extent of salvage is very good. Mortality reduction is drastic. If we cross these first 2 to 3 hours, then we can see flattening of curve. As all of you know, these days due to COVID outcome, flattening of curve, whereas this is harmful here, whereas in COVID it is beneficial. So after 3 hours, there is no much salvageable myocardium left. Whatever we do, it may not benefit the patient much. This is recent guidelines where they have taken this total ischemic time. First, patient develops the symptom. Once he develops symptoms, usually either they call ambulance or they go to nearest hospital. It may be PCI capable or non-PCI capable. So once this ambulance comes, the first medical contact, that is taken as first medical contact. This is important terminology in these guidelines. They have mainly in this guideline, they have defined the first medical contact. What is the first medical contact? That is the person capable of taking ECG and doing defibrillation, and who can interpret the ECG and make a diagnosis. That is called first medical contact. And the ECG and diagnosis should be done within 10 minutes of first medical contact to reduce the delay. As we all know, time is muscle. So reduce the delay within 10 minutes of first medical contact. His ECG should be done and his diagnosis should be confirmed, whether it is STEMI and STEMI. If it is STEMI, if patient in ambulance or if patient goes to a non-PCI capable center, then we should decide whether what is the time required for PCI. If patient can be shifted to another hospital within 120 minutes and can undergo the procedure within 120 minutes, not shifting, it is within 120 minutes, we should open the vessel. If that can be possible, then we should shift the patient to PCI capable center. If that cannot be done, if shifting and opening the vessel will take more than 120 minutes, then it's always better to do fibrinolysis and then shift the patient. So once fibrinolysis strategy is decided, then within 10 minutes we should give the injection and do reperfusion. Within 10 minutes, the time delay. Whereas the primary PCI, then within 90 minutes we should open the vessel. If patient goes to PCI capable center, then within 10 minutes ST elevation, my diagnosis, and within 60 minutes reperfusion or opening the vessel should be done. As I discussed earlier, this first medical contact is it can be anybody, either physician, paramedic, or nurse, or other trained EMS personnel who can obtain and interpret the ECG and deliver defibrillation. That is called first medical contact. STEMI diagnosis based on ECG. Primary PCI is emergent PCI with either balloon, stent, or wire, which is done without giving any fibrinolysis treatment. That is primary PCI. These are different definition according to the guidelines. Then rescue PCI is we do thrombolysis and we assess after thrombolysis 60 to 90 minutes ECG we assess. If there is more than 50% ST resolution, then patient has responded to thrombolysis. We can do elective angiogram and angioplasty. If the patient is still having pain and ECG is not settled, that means less than 50% reduction in ST elevation, then we should take him up for immediately for rescue PCI. Routine early PCI means those with successful fibrinolysis, 2 to 24 hours, we should do angiogram, and if vessel is occluded, we should open. Pharmacoinvasive is routine fibrinolysis followed by either rescue PCI or early PCI strategy. That is pharmacoinvasive approach. Both we are using in this. So this is to the different time periods and what we should do. So immediately after ST elevation MI, so as I discussed earlier, less than 120 or more than 120 minutes. If it is less than 120 minutes, immediately transfer. Within 90 minutes, we should open the vessel. If it is not possible to transfer within 120 minutes, then bolus of fibrinolytic and transfer to PCI center. And if patient ECG is settled, meets reperfusion criteria, then routine PCI. If it doesn't settle, ECG is not settled, and his pain is still persistent, then plan rescue PCI. So this is if it is first 12 hours, we can consider thrombolysis. If it is not, if it is more than 12 hours, then we should take him for angioplasty. Thrombolysis, there is no indication after 12 hours. So this is reperfusion strategies. So symptom onset, first 12 hours. If less than 120 minutes, we can do PCI, then shift to PCI. If it is not possible, then thrombolysis. And more than 12 hours, it's only primary PCI up to 48 hours. If symptoms and hemodynamic instability or arrhythmias are there, immediately it should be taken for primary PCI. In asymptomatic stable patients, it is class 2A indication, whereas in symptomatic patients, so these three things, if it is there, either hemodynamic instability or cardiogenic shock, arrhythmias, and persistent chest pain, then we should immediately take him up for a primary PCI from 12 to 48 hours. If these things are not there, patient is stable, then it is class 2A indication. Still there is indication for primary PCI. And after 48 hours, if patient is not symptomatic, then routine PCI is harmful. We should not do more than 48 hours. If patient has symptoms, even after 48 hours, then we can open the vessel. If it is not, the patient is asymptomatic, then it is class 3A indication. It is harmful. We should not open the vessel. We should manage medically, stabilizing. Same thing is given here. So they have kept different time targets. I told you I already discussed this thing. Maximum time from first medical contact to ECG less than 10 minutes. From STEMI diagnosis to primary PCI and wire crossing, if it is can be done within 120 minutes, then should be transferred to that. If it is not possible to transfer within 120 minutes, then fibrinal thrombolysis. And in PCI capable hospital, within 60 minutes, we should do angioplasty. If we are shifting the patient, then within 90 minutes, we should do open the vessel, that is angioplasty. And once the diagnosis of STEMI done, if we are planning to go ahead with the thrombolysis, then within 10 minutes, we should administer the thrombolytic agent. And after thrombolysis, 60 to 90 minutes, we should reassess the patient condition, doing repeat ECG, check his symptoms. Then if it's settled, okay, fine, we can do in 2 to 24 hours, we can plan angiogram. If it is not settled, immediately it should be taken for rescue PCI. This is procedure related. I will not go into detail, but what this suggests mainly in stable patients, if hemodynamically stable, if there is multiple coronary arteries are blocked, we should open only the culprit coronary artery, or IRA is infarct related artery. that we should open. If patient is in cardiogenic shock, then if the other artery also more than 90% or severe stenosis is there, we should open that vessel also. The outcome has seen better in cardiogenic patients opening multiple blocks. And stenting is recommended in almost all the patients. And the elective stenting sometimes we do in patients with high thrombus burden, where thrombus will not get cleared. In such patients, we open the vessel, we allow blood to flow, and we will take him up for a repeat or check angiogram maybe after 24 hours, see whether thrombus has cleared or not. And coming to antiplatelet therapy, all patients should be loaded with aspirin, either oral 150 to 325 mg or IV. IV aspirin is also available, not in India. Outside it is available, they are using it. In anticoagulation, routinely we are using unfractionated heparin in primary PCI patients. Aspirin loading 150 to 300, or if we are giving IV, then 75 to 250 mg. The maintenance dose should be 75 to 100 milligram per day. Clopidogrel in primary angioplasty, we will give 600 mg loading followed by maintenance dose of 75. Prasugrel 60 milligram loading followed by 10 milligram maintenance dose. And there are we should be careful using prasugrel. It is contraindicated in patients with previous stroke, and we should be careful in more than 75 years and less than 60 kgs. We can use the lesser dose, that is 5 milligram. Ticagrelor is the most potent, and nowadays it is the most commonly used antiplatelet during angioplasty. The loading dose is 180 milligrams and maintenance is 90 milligram 2 times a day. Then this obexelimab, eptifibatide, and tirofiban or GP2B3A inhibitor is used when thrombus burden is more during a procedure. Earlier, these were given before taking him up for primary angioplasty, but recent guidelines, it should be used only if there is high thrombus burden during procedure. And dose of unfractionated heparin is 70 to 100 international unit per kg bolus. And if we are using GP2B3A inhibitor, then we should reduce the dose almost to half of this dose. Then bivalirudin is used where there is heparin resistance or patient is not responding to heparin. In that such patients we can use this bivalirudin, or patient is having HIT, that is heparin induced thrombocytopenia. In them we can use bivalirudin. In those patients whom we have not reperfused, we have not used either thrombolysis or because they came late more than 48 hours and patient is stable, in them we will use only aspirin or clopidogrel. And parenteral anticoagulants, same as unfractionated heparin, enoxaparin or fondaparinux can be used. This is one primary angioplasty which we did recently. A 42-year-old male came with 5 hours chest pain. He's a diabetic smoker and blood pressure was 90 by 60. And the ECG, there was extensive interval MI. EF was around 35%. We did angiogram, left shoot, left coronary. This is left main coronary artery. This is left anterior descending artery. You can see here 90%, almost 95, 99% occlusion. This is ramus and this is left circumflex artery, normal. You can see the delayed dye clearance. That is suggestive of slow flow or thrombus burden. This is same in caudal view, different view. You can see a slow flow and occlusion here. And we passed a wire, we did thrombus aspiration. Though nowadays the thrombus aspiration routinely we should not do because of recent trial, that is test trial, where they found increased stroke incidence in such patients where we do thrombus aspiration. Sometimes the thrombus may migrate to carotid arteries and the patient may develop stroke. So routinely we should not do, but whereas in young patients with high thrombus burden, we are doing thrombus aspiration. So after thrombus aspiration and stenting, you can see the result. Very good flow, brisk flow is there, TIMI3 flow. And coming to fibrinolytic therapy, it should be started within 10 minutes once we decided to fibrinolyze the patient. And fibrin specific agent like tenecteplase, alteplase, or retiplase is recommended. And in more than 75 years of age, half dose tenecteplase is has shown better outcome. And antiplatelet therapy, same oral aspirin or IV aspirin and clopidogrel, and DAPT should be continued for 1 year. Along with this fibrinolysis, we should give anticoagulation because reocclusion is rates are high. Either enoxaparin we can use or unfractionated heparin. And routine angiogram after fibrinolysis in 2 to 24 hours is indicated in all the patients. Rescue PCI after fibrinolysis, when fibrinolysis has failed, that is less than 50% ST segment resolution at 60 to 90 minute ECG, immediately he should be taken for rescue PCI. This is different dosages. Streptokinase, which is commonly used and very cheap in our setup, 1.5 million units over 30 to 60 minutes we use it. Whereas retiplase and tenecteplase are bolus dose. This tenecteplase more than 75 years, we should reduce the dose to half. And aspirin and clopidogrel we use 300 mg in fibrinolyzed patients for thrombolysis, whereas for PCI we use 600 mg. Enoxaparin dose, which we commonly use, actually ideally we should give 30 milligram IV bolus, followed 15 minutes later by 1 milligram per kg every 12 hours. It can be given up to 8 days. And in more than 75 years, bolus dose we should not use. We should use lesser dose of 0.75 milligram per kg of 2 times a day. And unfractionated heparin, 60 unit international unit IV per kg, international unit per kg bolus. Then infusion 800 to 1000 units per hour for 24 to 48 hours. If we are using unfractionated heparin, better not to use it more than 48 hours because there are more chances of hit, that is heparin induced thrombocytopenia. In streptokinase used patient, we can use fondaparinux. In other tenecteplase and retiplase, it is not indicated. Then contraindication, most of you are knowing about this because you will be doing the for stroke also, you will be doing the fibrinolysis. So the absolute contraindication, previous ICH, a stroke of unknown origin at any time, and ischemic stroke in the preceding 6 months, and central nervous system neoplasms or AV malformation, then recent major trauma, surgery or head injury in the last 1 month, and GI bleeding within 1 month, and history of bleeding disorder, then aortic dissection, and non-compressible puncture in the past 24 hours, like in liver biopsy or lumbar puncture. And monitoring for first 24 hours, all STEMI patients should be in ICU. So after 24 hours, stable patient, we can shift to step down ICU, where only monitoring will be there for another for 24 hours. And hospital discharge in stable and uncomplicated patient, we can plan in 48 to 72 hours. In chronic kidney disease, we should modify a little bit. Enoxaparin in stage 5 we should not use. In stage 4 only once a day we can use. And clopidogrel, there is no much problem with aspirin and clopidogrel. Ticagrelor in stage 5 and prasugrel not recommended. Unfractionated heparin, the advantage is there is no dose adjustment is required, so we can use unfractionated heparin. Bivalidine is not indicated in renal failure patient. So these patients' sugar should be controlled. Ideally, if they are more than 180, we should 180 milligram, then RBS, then we should start treatment for them. And in older age patients and old cardiovascular disease and long diabetes duration, in such patients, we should be less aggressive in diabetic management because hypoglycemia is more dangerous. Emergency echocardiogram is indicated in all these patients. In patients with pre-discharge EF of less than 40%, all those patients we should repeat echocardiogram after 6 to 12 weeks to reassess their myocardial LV function, whether it is improved or remained same or worsened. Because if EF is less than 35 to 40%, more than 40 days, it is an indication for ICD implantation because they are more prone for scar VT. So in such cases, it is an indication for ICD implantation. And when echo is not proper or inconclusive or echo windows are suboptimal, we can use MRI to assess the LV function. And smoking cessation is very important. That is the main behavioral changes we should bring in such patients. And we can also use this polypill combination to make the patient more adherent to the treatment, because there will be many medication and the patient may not continue with the medication and may miss the medication. And cardiac rehabilitation is nowadays coming up in a big way, so that we can advise them regarding exercise. We can do some stress test, symptom limited stress test, and advise them regarding exercise. And all these patients, we should continue antiplatelet therapy at least for 1 year, like aspirin and clopidogrel or ticagrelor. And recently, Pegasus trial has come, which has given indication for ticagrelor, that is reduced dose 60 milligram BD up to 3 years was found beneficial. And the DAPT at least for 12 months. We should consider if a patient has high bleeding risk, we should assess using Has bleed score. If it is more than 3, then we can reduce this antiplatelet duration to a dual antiplatelet duration to 6 months in such patients. And recently, this Atlas trial, it has shown the combination of clopidogrel, aspirin, and rivaroxaban, where in that trial they studied 5 milligram rivaroxaban and 2.5 milligram, and they found adverse cardiac outcomes were reduced over 1 year. So routinely, after acute setting during discharge, the prescribing them, starting them on rivaroxaban is class 2B indication according to these guidelines. This is a new thing which has come up in this guideline. So as I discussed earlier, this aspirin, we should continue this treatment with aspirin and either clopidogrel, prasugrel, or ticagrelor. Then statins, idostatins, either 40 or 80 milligrams should be continued at least 1 to 3 months. Then if still LDL levels are high, we can continue with that. Then heparin, if we are using unfractionated heparin for 48 hours, if enoxaparin can be given up to 8 days. Then all the mortality reducing agents like beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, and mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists should be continued in these patients. So how to assess their risk? What is the risk of mortality? So this TIMI risk score is there for ST elevation in my patients. So for different history, examination, and presentation criteria, they have given different points. If risk score is 0, their 30-day mortality is around 0.8. So accordingly, if it is risk score is more than 8, then 30-day mortality is around 36%. This I think we can do in all ICU patients who get admitted with STEMI patients. So same patient who had a PCI with we saw his ECG that was extensive interval MI was there, and his LAD was stented and he developed dyspnea, crepitations, and hypotension 1 day later. Blood pressure was 105 or 60, and heart rate was 70, and respiratory rate was 24. What is the complication? Patient has gone for heart failure because it has extensive interval MI. So myocardium, almost 50% of myocardium is damaged. So he has gone for heart failure. What are the next steps? We can start him on diuretics. Then if patient is not responding, then inotrope. The patient BPA has dropped, if it is less than 80/50, then vasopressors we can start in, or IABP we can. So most common complication after MI are mainly heart failure, recurrent ischemia, mechanical complications like ventricular septal rupture or severe mitral regurgitation. And patient may have arrhythmias like VTVF. It is mainly due to myocardial damage due to this acute MI, and also it may occur due to stent occlusion or stent thrombosis or valvular dysfunction. As I told, mitral regurgitation may occur, acute severe MR. So once patient is gone for heart failure, we should stop beta blocker. Antiplatelet therapy and heparin should be continued. Consider vasodilator if BP is high, more than 100, like nitroglycerin. Inotropic agent if BP is low, then loop diuretics. In those with BP less than 100, either we can consider intra-aortic balloon pump or Impella or ECMO. These are percutaneous mechanical support devices. We can consider these things. Though intra-aortic balloon pump recently SHOCK 2 trial, there is no much benefit. It is the only available and easily available thing. And inotropic agent, and if patient has multivessel disease, then we can consider bypass surgery. This is another patient, ECG, and ECG is showing ST elevation in 2, 3, and AVF. There is also reciprocal changes in 1 AVL, and also ST depression in V1, V2, V3. So suggestive of extensive inferior wall MI, RV MI, posterior MI. So BP is 90/50. JVP is elevated mainly due to mostly RV dysfunction patient is in. How should this hypotension be treated, and what medication should be avoided? Here mainly we should give fluids, and if not responding, then we should. To diagnose RV infarct, as I told you earlier, lead ST elevation in lead 3 more than lead 2, suggestive of RV infarction. And in such patient, we should take V3R and V4R to diagnose RVM. So in treatment, mainly fluids, then consider ionotropes or balloon pump if they are refractory. And we should avoid nitroglycerin and diuretics in these patients. So rest all same. Once LV dysfunction, it is a class 1 indication for ACE inhibitors, beta blocker, and mineralocorticoid receptor, and loop diuretics for symptom relief. And nitrates, if BP is high, we should give nitroglycerin, and hypoxemia, we should give oxygen in heart failure patients. If they are in respiratory failure, then we can consider a non-invasive ventilation or intubation. And in cardiogenic shock, those patients with ST elevation MI, cardiogenic shock, immediate either if patient angiogram should be done. If it is amenable for primary angioplasty, then it should be done. If it is patient is not suitable for primary angioplasty, then he should be taken for emergency coronary artery bypass surgery. And in them, invasive blood pressure monitoring with arterial line should be done, and echo should be repeated. See any complication. And this, in all those patients with cardiogenic shock, even if duration is more than 12 hours, sometimes they will benefit by thrombolysis where there is no PCI center available nearby. It is a class 2A indication for patients. And in cardiogenic shock, as I told you earlier, complete revascularization. If other vessels are also blocked, then we should also open and stent those vessels. It is a class 2A indication. And IABP is class 2A indication in cardiogenic shock and ST elevation. And PA catheter monitoring is class 2B, benefit and risk doubtful. Then in resistant patient, we can consider ultrafiltration, those with congestion. And the short-term mechanical support, IABP, Impella, or ECMO can be used in such patients. And routine IABP is not indicated indicated in these patients. ST elevation MI and cardiogenic shock. It is not indicated routinely. Only in those patients who are refractory and not responding to the primary PCI. In such patients, we can try this. This is another case. A 72-year-old man who had a hip arthroplasty 3 days ago and is transferred to ICU with palpitation and shortness of breath. His blood pressure is stable, saturation is 96% and 2-liter oxygen, and chest CT is normal. So his ECG done, it shows atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter with fibrillation. In this patient, it may be post-surgery stress. So we should rule out pulmonary embolism, CTPA. By then electrolyte abnormality we should rule out. Then ischemia, it may be perioperative MI if troponin is elevated. Usually it occurs in second or third post-op day. Usually painless and new arrhythmias will occur. And we should consider primary PCI in such patients as thrombolytics are contraindicated. It is post-surgery case. And should administer same antiplatelet drugs, beta blockers. And we should take surgeon opinion about antiplatelets and anticoagulants. And many times, many patients with present with atrial fibrillation in the ST elevation MI. So if they are hemodynamically unstable, immediately we should cardiovert them. If hemodynamically stable, either we can consider giving intravenous beta blocker if his BP is stable, or intravenous amiodarone. And here intravenous beta blocker amiodarone scores over digitalis. Digitalis is in ACS scenario, it is not that safe. And we should also see the requirement for oral and continuous oral anticoagulation. Charts VASC score we should assess. If it is more than 2, then we should start him on oral anticoagulation. And in the patients who present with the VT/VF intravenous beta blocker, if patient's BP is stable, we can give intravenous beta blocker. If BP is not stable, then we can give amiodarone. And if any electrolyte abnormalities are there, we should correct it, like hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia. And in cases with bradycardia, sometimes with the inferior valve MI, they can come with bradycardia or AV block. So we can use positive inotropic medication like epinephrine, vasopressin, or atropine, and temporary pacing. And in such, this is an indication for urgent angiogram. The rhythm disturbance is there, immediate angiogram and intervention should be done. And the long-term management of the VT is ICD, that is intracardiac defibrillator. In all patients with NYHA class 2 to 3 symptoms, EF less than 35%, despite optimal medical therapy for more than for 3 months, we should consider this. This is a class 1 indication. And less than within 40 days of MI, we should not do ICD implantation. We should wait at least 40 days because this acute ischemia, sometimes recurrent VT may occur. In such patients, we should manage them with medicines, and only after 40 days we should consider this ICD therapy. There are many challenges in managing these patients. If patient comes with aspirin allergy, what to do? And if aspirin allergy, either we have to desensitize it with the low dose aspirin, or we have to use ticagrelor, clopidogrel, and prasugrel. And a patient with coffee ground emesis, that is hematemesis, such patient we should be careful in using because we will be using aspirin. Then patient with severe heart failure exacerbation and patient with renal failure is not on dialysis. So in GI bleed, we have to avoid aspirin, heparin, and GP2B3 inhibitors, thrombolytics. and lesser controlled breeding with bivalveridine. So it's short acting, we can use that. And unfractionated heparin preferred due to short half-life, and we can reverse that. And in severe heart failure, we should avoid beta blockers unless heart failure is controlled. Once heart failure is controlled, we can start them on beta blocker. And if BP is low, avoid the ACE inhibitor. In renal failure, we should be careful using low molecular weight heparin. We can use unfractionated heparin. Another new terminology has come, that is myocardial infarction with non-obstructive coronary arteries. So these patients meet universal acute MI criteria. But when angiogram was done, the lesion was not less than 50%. So, so it is non-obstructive coronary arteries. So in them, we should investigate them further. Like LV valve motion assessment should be done. Then we should rule out myocarditis by echo and MRI, and if needed, endomyocardial biopsy. Then it may be due to microvascular ischemia. We can assess by MRI, and also we can do ergonomine or acetylcholine test for this. Then for microvascular dysfunction,
Who cannot hear that? Can you hear? Raghu, can you hear? Raghu, there is a problem. We cannot hear.
Hello, is it audible now? Hello.
Yeah, audible. Now it is audible.
Now I am speaking with my computer. Just see, sir. Please talk, sir.
No.
So very high risk or hemodynamic instability or cardiogenic shock. Is it audible?
Yeah, it's better, sir. It's audible. Yeah, audible, sir. Audible.
Very high risk criteria in these non-escalation MI patients are hemodynamic instability or cardiogenic shock, then recurrent or ongoing chest pain refractory to medical treatment, then life-threatening arrhythmias or cardiac arrest, then mechanical complications of MI like severe MR or VSR, then acute heart failure, then recurrent dynamic ST wave changes with the intermittent ST elevation. Such patients we should consider as ST elevation MI equivalents, and immediately we should take him up for angiogram and intervention. Then within 2 hours. Then there are high risk criteria like rise or fall in cardiac troponin, which is compatible with MI, and dynamic STT changes, so either symptomatic or silent, and Gray score is high, more than 140. They should be taken for angiogram. And the intermediate risk criteria like diabetes, the risk factors are there, renal insufficiency, EF LV dysfunction, then early post-infarct angina, then prior PTCA, then prior CABG, or Gray score 109 to 140. They should be considered for elective angiogram. Then lower risk criteria, they should be tested in non-invasive stress test.
Hello.
Hello. So, symptom onset to first medical contact, we should once the diagnosis of NSTEMI is made. So whether it is EMS or non-PCI center or PCI center, we should assess. If it is a non-PCI center, if it is very high risk, then immediate transfer. If it is high risk, then early invasive strategy within 24 hours angiogram. And if it is intermediate risk, angiogram within 72 hours. And in low risk patients, we should do non-invasive testing to assess their therapeutic strategy. So this is the Gray score, where they take history-wise, like age, different points they give from 30 years to 90 years. Then congestive heart failure, they give 24 points. Then history of MI, 12 points. Then hospital presentation findings like resting heart rate, they give different points from 50 to 200. Then blood pressure according to their low hypotension, hypertension, they give different points. Then ST segment depression, they give 11 points ECG changes. And the creatinine also they take in this for from 1 to 20 points. Then cardiac enzyme elevation also they give 15 points. And no in-hospital PCI they give 14 points. According to this, they assess the this one risk score. This is the GRACE risk. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir. You're audible.
Okay. So according to this, they categorize into low risk, intermediate, and high risk. And according to that, we can stratify their mortality risk also. And also at 6 months post-discharge mortality risk also we can quantify using this GRACE score. Though it is a little bit cumbersome. Whereas this TIMI risk score is easy for unstable angina, STEMI. Same ST elevation MI also TIMI risk score there is there, and for this also risk score is there. Based on history and presentation, they give different points like age and risk factors, then history of CAD, then aspirin used in the past. Then a presentation like within 24 hours or increased cardiac troponin, then ST changes. According to the score, they can assess mortality and recurrent ischemic events. So this is different medications which has to be used in such patients. If they develop atrial fibrillation, these patients, we should assess HAS bleed score. If it is 0 to 2, we can use triple therapy for 6 months. Then we can continue with dual therapy, that is oral anticoagulants plus aspirin and clopidogrel. If it is HAS bleed score is high, more than 3, then that is high risk for bleeding. So in them, this triple therapy only for 1 month. Then we have to continue with either clopidogrel aspirin with oral anticoagulant for another 12 months. If they are managed medically or CABG, only dual therapy, oral anticoagulant with either clopidogrel or aspirin. And they should be continued after 1 year with oral anticoagulant only. And monitoring unstable angina, they can be admitted either in ward or can be discharged. No requirement for ICU monitoring. In NSTEMI, with the low risk for cardiac arrhythmias, intermediate care unit or coronary care unit for 24 hours. In high risk NSTEMIs, intensive care unit at least for 24 to 48 hours. For all patients, we should advise the lifestyle changes, healthy diet, regular physical activity, smoking cessation. Then high intensity statin in all these patients. And ACE inhibitor if in those with EF less than 40%, and beta blockers in those with less than 40%. These are class 1 indication. And the mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, though eplerenone is preferred in those with less than EF less than 35%. And diastolic BP should be maintained less than 90. And the cardiac rehabilitation program, and we can assess and modify their lifestyle habits. That is a must in all these patients. And in high LDL cholesterol, we should consider other like azithromycin or PCSK inhibitor if they are not controlled with high dose of statin. In summary, diagnosis of STEMI or NSTEMI is based on symptoms, risk factors, ECG, and enzymes. And antiplatelets and anticoagulant agents are important in STEMI or NSTEMI patients. And high-risk NSTEMI patients are candidates for early intervention. And then plan for early reperfusion of STEMI should be developed based on resources in the facility and the community. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, sir, for the detailed discussion. Hello. Thank you so much, sir, for the detailed discussion of STEMI and STEMI. Is there any other question for the for sir? Is they can chat or they can come up come up with the video. Sir, one basic question actually. Why there is a in pathophysiology point of view, why there is ST elevation? Vessel is occluded, ST elevation is there, and non-ST elevation there is no ST elevation, is ST depression. Why it is happening so?
It is mainly due to the sudden occlusion, 100% occlusion occurs. Then they will develop ST elevation MI. It is actually the infarcted segment will act as a transmitter for capturing opposite side ECG changes, electrical activity.
Okay.
So that will be shown as ST elevation. Non-ST elevation MI, usually there will be partial occlusion. So only endocardial aspect, subendothelial aspect, there will be some ischemia will be there. Epicardium almost normally pursues the epicardial arteries. So that's why they present with ST depression and T wave changes. Also, sometimes this is seen in a triple vessel disease, where opposite side will not be acting as a conductor for this electrical activity. That time, sometimes severe triple vessel disease, even though 100% occlusion is there, they may present as non-ST elevation. So nowadays, earlier it was considered ST elevation MI is severe form and non-ST elevation MI is milder form. But nowadays, this non-ST elevation MI mortality is even higher than ST elevation because of usually they will have triple vessel.
Dr. Daneshwar want to ask anticoagulation. How long we have to give it, sir, for post MI?
Post MI, the routine are only in those patients with indication for anticoagulation. Hello.
Daneshwar. Post MI.
In post MI, it is at present it is not indicated. It is a class 2B indication. So benefit and risk, there is not clear benefit compared to risk. So only one trial it has shown, Atlas trial, where they have used 5 milligram and 2.5 milligram, and compared to bleeding and reduced adverse outcomes of cardiac problem. They advised a 2B indication for 2.5 mg. 5 mg they saw some increase in bleeding, whereas 2.5 mg they found some benefit, reduction in major adverse cardiac outcomes. So they studied for 2 years. So I think we can use for 1 year or 2 years, but still it is not very clear. 2B indication. If it comes another 2-3 trials comes, and if it becomes 2A or 1 indication, then we can use regularly. Otherwise, with atrial fibrillation, so we should, if atrial fibrillation is there, we have to continue oral anticoagulation. Almost after 1 year, we can stop aspirin and clopidogrel, and we can continue only oral anticoagulation till further evidence comes, or lifelong at present.
Are you using IV enoxaparin, sir, in STEMI? That I mentioned IV enoxaparin.
That is after PCI or after this one, thrombolysis.
Are you using it, sir, regularly?
No, we are not using.
Okay. Any other questions?
We usually use streptokinase. So re-occlusion rate is high in altiplase and tenecteplase retiplase. There, I think we have to use this IV.
Okay.
Because early re-occlusion is common in them. They are more specific. So the early re-occlusion is common. In them, we have to give IV, and then we have to start after 15 minutes regular dose.
Dr. Daneshwar want to ask, second time streptokinase we can't use it, sir.
Usually, we don't use it for 6 days to 6 months. That is 6 we take it. 6 days to 6 months we don't use it. We usually use urokinase. Otherwise, we use, if it is less than 6 days or more than 6 months, we use streptokinase.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your valuable time. Actually,
Sir, out of interest, something, sir, like there's something new, like intervascular ultrasound guided angioplasty. Like probably it's a new thing in the practice. What is your opinion about this, sir? Like, or are people using it, or it's just in the experimental phase?
Intervascular ultrasound, I was already they are using. I was mainly to assess vessel lumen, thrombus, dissection. During procedure, any complication is there. Usually, it will give a clear picture. I was, and also in borderline lesions where there is 70%, 80% lesions are there. In them, we use IVUS to assess the minimal lumen diameter and minimal area inside the vessel. There are cutoff points. If it is less than this, we have to stent. If it is more than that, we have to medically.
Is it beneficial compared to routine things, or should whether whether it should be routinely used or only in specific group of cases?
Complication occurs in Western world, they use it routinely, and different like left main intervention. If we are doing, then we have to use it routinely in the beginning. But there are many centers in France and all who are stalwarts in angioplasty. They say we don't use ultrasound, intravascular. Whereas in US, it is commonly they use IVUS, and IVUS guided, we can give very good result, and we can see sometimes under expansion of stent will occur during procedure. That is a major cause for stent thrombosis. We can avoid that during this acute coronary syndrome patient. Whereas another thinking is more time you spend in coronary arteries doing something there, the complication chances are high. So get in fast, finish your work, get out fast. That is the concept which these France people they will advocate, and they don't use these extra IVUS and OCTs come to assess this stent malposition, whether stent has expanded.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions from audience?
I'll go chat box. There are questions.
Yeah, Dr. Ashri, Dr. Ashri want to ask, sir, when is the culprit PCI recommended and when multivessel PCI?
Culprit vessel in stable patients, we do culprit vessel this day. Maybe after 1 or 2 days, once everything settles, we do other vessels. If patient is in cardiogenic shock, usually the guidelines advise you can do multivessel PTCI during primary angioplasty. For example, patient with interval MI with BP of 80 and patient has left anterior descending artery 99% and right coronary artery 90%, then we can open it in the same setting both together. If patient is stable, BP is 120, 80, patient has left anterior descending artery 100% and interval MI, we open the left anterior descending artery. And if right coronary artery 90% lesion is there, we will not touch that. We will shift the patient to ICU and stabilize him for 2 days. After that, we will take that RCA for another procedure.
Okay, thank you, sir. What about the CABG after MI? How early can it be done?
In the Western world, they are using sometimes they will have multivessel disease like left main disease in primary acute ST elevation MI, left main disease with the triple vessel disease. They do well with CABG, but problem is early after MI, the tissue will be necrotic and friable, and surgeons always hesitate in touching this myocardium. And that's why they are, as far as possible, they will avoid postpone surgery for 1 to 2 weeks, because once the tissue gets stabilized, then it is easy for them to handle this. So emergency CABG is being done, and it has high mortality, but where the PCI has failed, that patient.
One question, we have one patient recently had enterolateral MI, underwent stenting on 13/6. Now he came. Now ECG show ST elevation in enterolateral leads. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your valuable time. I know there will be more questions will be there. We will discuss in the group. Sorry for the interruption in between. There was no audible for almost few minutes. From 4:04 to 4:08, 4 minutes there was no audible. Unable to rectify at that time. Sorry for that. Anyway, we will give the PPT in the PDF format as well as a webinar recording as early as possible, so that will compensate those part actually. Thank you so much, sir, once again for your valuable time, and welcome you again if there is welcome you again in next class, sir. Thank you so much.
I thank the Impact and Mahan and ISCCM Mysore for giving me this opportunity. ಅದು ಇನ್ ಬಿಟ್ವೀನ್ ಏನೋ ನೆಟ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಅಂತ ಬಂತ, ಅವಾಗ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಕಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ.